I'm Sasha Mackler, the Executive Director of the Energy Program at the Bipartisan Policy Center.
And I'm Leslie Gentarosimi, Managing Director of the BPC Energy Program.
And we are so glad that you could join us for today's webinar, which is being co-hosted by the American Association of Blacks in Energy. Before we hear opening remarks from Congressman Mark Veazey of Texas, Leslie and I will start things off this afternoon with a little bit of background and context on how we got to this moment of talking about workforce opportunities stemming from new investments in our nation's infrastructure. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was signed into law late last year, is a historic achievement, providing a generational opportunity to transform America's transportation, energy, water, and broadband infrastructure with $550 billion in new funding. From the perspective of our energy program, we see the infrastructure law as a massive down payment towards an American clean energy future. By targeting the innovation and demonstration of new technologies, along with modernized permitting processes and significant upgrades to our electricity and transportation infrastructure, these investments will substantially reduce greenhouse gas emissions and create a path for the nation to reach net zero by 2050. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act positions the U.S. as a global leader in innovation while growing the American economy and jobs.
That's right, but at the same time, we know that economic and job growth has not been equally distributed across our country or across our population. And just yesterday, actually, the White House Council on Environmental Quality completed a comment period on their draft Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. This is an interactive mapping tool to identify disadvantaged communities that are marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by pollution. And federal agencies will be using this tool to guide their infrastructure investments towards the goal that the Biden administration set as part of their Justice 40 initiative, which directs 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal investments to disadvantaged communities that have and are today experiencing underinvestment in their energy, transit, housing, and water infrastructure, have a disproportionate pollution burden, and job training and employment disparities. And so today's discussion with our expert panel, very timely, and we're going to hear from them after opening remarks from Congressman Veazey.
Yeah, today's event is one in a series of public discussions that BPC and its partners are having to sharpen the understanding of barriers to implementation and highlight opportunities for impact. We held a launch of this series last month with the White House Senior Advisor and Infrastructure Coordinator, Mitch Landrieu, co-sponsored by the National Association of Counties and the National League of Cities. And you should definitely keep an eye on BPC's website for more details on upcoming infrastructure events later this spring and into the summer. But now I have the pleasure of introducing Congressman Mark Veazey, who proudly represents Texas's newly drawn Congressional District 33 in the U.S. House of Representatives. First elected in 2004, then state representative, Veazey served 5 consecutive terms in the Texas State House. And as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, Congressman Veazey was appointed to serve on the Committee on Energy and Commerce and on the Armed Services Committee. The congressman also founded the Voting Rights Caucus, is co-chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Task Force on Foreign Affairs and National Security, and is co-chair of the Blue Collar Caucus. The congressman is a longtime advocate for Texas's middle-class families, and we're really glad to have the opportunity to hear his opening remarks today. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. This is Congressman Mark Veazey of Texas's 33rd District joining you today to discuss the importance of job creation and inclusive workforce development opportunity as our country builds the new clean energy system of the future. As all of you may know, my home state of Texas plays a unique role in the nexus of all these topics, and that is why I am so excited to join the Bipartisan Policy Center today. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which passed late last year on a bipartisan basis, makes a historic and necessary $1.2 trillion investment in modernizing our country's infrastructure. This package provides a critical lifeline to our country as we work to meet our goals by achieving a net zero economy by 2050. The package made key investments to clean energy and climate priorities like public transports, electric vehicle infrastructure, clean buses, electrification of ports and airports, power and grid systems, technology demonstration programs, and climate resilience. For Texas, the package allocates important investments to repair and rebuild our roads and bridges with a focus on climate change mitigation, build a network of EV chargers to facilitate long-distance travel and provide convenient work and charging options, and prepare more of our infrastructure for the impacts of climate change. These investments will bolster America's competitiveness, resilience, and economy, all while creating good-paying jobs, saving people money, and building an equitable, clean energy economy of the future. That is why I was so proud to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to get this package to President Biden's desk and signed into law late last year. While the bipartisan infrastructure law is a great step forward, we must also continue to focus on the concerning gap when it comes to gender and racial diversity in the clean energy workforce. Clean energy is driving job growth in the U.S. energy economy, and a diverse set of workers can and should benefit from this dynamic and exciting growth. More needs to be done to address inequities, ensure inclusive worker opportunities, and reduce wealth gaps so that all Americans can benefit from the new investments in the bipartisan infrastructure law. There must be more support for education and job training for members of historically underserved communities, including apprenticeships in the expanding sector, and improve access to government procurement, and of course, contracting opportunities for small, disadvantaged, and minority-owned businesses. I plan on using my position in Congress, particularly as a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, to focus on this exact issue, because advancing equity in the clean energy sector requires a qualified, diverse workforce that is representative of the communities that it serves. Hello, everyone.
Thank you to Congressman Veazey for those remarks. And I'm going to turn now to introduce our panelists all together, and then we will move into the discussion portion, which will be followed by an audience Q&A period. So please get those questions ready. Feel free to type them into the chat if you're watching on YouTube, or tag us at hashtag BPC Live, and we will get those questions here. So first, we have Robert D. Matthews joining us as Vice President and Chief Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Officer at Exelon. In this role, Robert designs enterprise-wide strategies that facilitate a diverse and inclusive environment and position Exelon as a recognized leader in DEI. And he previously served as Vice President for Workforce Development and Exelon Utilities Chief of Staff. And Robert actually began his energy career at BGE in Baltimore, where he served in roles including Chief of Staff and Director for Talent Management and Talent Acquisition. Robert serves on the board for two organizations, the Leadership and the Baltimore Bon Secours Foundation, which is committed to improving the city of Baltimore's quality of life, health, and economic vitality. And we're also so pleased to have Ralph Cleveland here. He is the president and CEO of the American Association of Blacks in Energy, where he also served as its interim president and CEO, past chairman, and member of ABE's board of directors. And an engineer by training, Ralph began his energy career over 30 years ago at Mobil and has served in many different corporate and energy industry roles, including at AGL Resources, now part of Southern Company, and as chairman and CEO of several of AGL's commercial and operating subsidiaries, including Nicor Gas in Illinois. And Ralph also served as the global head of customer operations and business development or business transformation for AIG, and has chaired the North American Energy Standards Board, the American Institute for Managing Diversity, and the Fulton County, Georgia Workforce Investment Board. And finally, we also have Arlen Harrell joining us today. He is the Deputy Chief of Innovation and Partnerships at the DC Department of Employment Services right here in Washington, DC. And in this role, he oversees the Bureau of Innovation and Partnerships, comprised of the Office of Talent and Client Services and the DC Infrastructure Academy. Previously, Arlen was the Associate Director of the Infrastructure Academy, as well as served as the External Affairs Manager for the City Administrator, a role in which he was instrumental in the creation of the Academy. And Arlen has also previously served as Deputy Director for Intergovernmental Affairs at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and as the Director of Intergovernmental Affairs for the City of Cincinnati in Ohio. Thank you all for joining us today. And this is our panel. And Ralph, I'm actually going to turn to you first. It's so great to have Abe and you here co-hosting this event with us. And very much like the Bipartisan Policy Center, Abe as an organization, we exist in that space between government and the private sector, pushing both towards making progress on issues that matter to American families. And the part that really stood out to me as from your purpose statement was to encourage both the public and private sectors to be responsive to the problems, goals, and aspirations of African Americans in energy-related fields. And so I'd love to hear, can you talk a little bit more about that in the context of infrastructure investments and what's new and coming from this latest round of federal funding, and what can the private and public sectors be doing more of?
Thank you, Leslie. First, it's absolutely a pleasure to be here with you. I think this is a really critical time in our in the history of bringing energy to our consumers. I think with broadband, the advent of artificial intelligence and big data, and all that that's going to bring, and moving towards a clean economy, all that that's going to bring in terms of transformation of our economy. Means that this is a very critical time. We're at a critical inflection point. And so, and thank you for highlighting one of the purposes of AID, and that is to get others to be responsive, particularly those in decision-making positions, to be responsive to the needs and aspirations of our community in this space. That's really critical, and we take that as a sacred trust. And I would say that, given this transformation, given this critical inflection point, it is so important that we really take a look at, how decisions are made relative to who gets access, who gets opportunity. And what we really want to do is highlight those areas that will, number one, mean decisions that are made relative to who gets the jobs, who gets the economic opportunity in terms of being a supplier, but then also look at it from a standpoint of the impact to the consumers as well. We recognize that we have a pretty big base of vulnerable consumers out there that we have to be responsive to. And so when we talk about being responsive to their needs, I just provide one example. If there are opportunities to leave the grid that are made available through some public funding source, there should be also consideration given to what does it take for a smaller population to help maintain the grid that exists. And so we don't want an excess amount of that burden to flow to those who are most vulnerable. That just gives you one example. We're also, very concerned about the environmental issues, certainly as we improve the resources from a standpoint of green and renewable resources providing our energy. That's going to improve it for everyone. Because, and again, our community has been disproportionately suffering the adverse impacts from an environmental standpoint. So those are things that we really pay attention to, and we want to make sure that as those decisions are made, number one, we talk about equity in making those decisions. Equity recognizes that there are disparities that are very difficult to remediate in the short term that we need to do something about. And we make recommendations, give thought leadership to what some of those programs might look like that help create equity. And then it really, for the long term, it's all about creating the most just society that we can. And that means the removal of barriers that created the inequities in the first place. And so those are the things that we are very concerned about as we move forward. But we certainly see this as a terrific opportunity to create a more inclusive set of opportunities for everyone involved. And we certainly want to participate and do our fair share in that. We have a number of programs that we provide in this space, whether it's diversity leadership training, whether it's crafts, providing funding for individual training accounts within a workforce investment and an opportunity area, or whether it's providing scholarships and interns to students. These are things that we are really, active and look for sponsors to support and help us to deliver those programs. So that's my take on it, Leslie. I'm thrilled again to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks so much, Ralph. And Robert, I'll turn to you. And you've been in the utility side of things for a long time now. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, all this new attention on infrastructure, and how does infrastructure fit into the goals that Exelon has for the communities it serves?
Well, good afternoon, Leslie. It's a pleasure to be with you today. To thank you to the Bipartisan Policy Center and ABE for sponsoring and inviting me to be a part. I smiled initially when I heard your question because I've been in the industry for 17 years, which kind of pales into comparison to folks like Ralph, who I look up to, have been around for a time longer than that. I remember when I came into the industry and I said, well, how long have you been here? And they said, well, a long time. When you got 25 years in, come back and talk to me. So I'm proud to have been down in the industry a long time. Again, thanks for the question. I think the IIJA, and I'll just refer to it as that for short, provides a transformative opportunity for us to focus on infrastructure and us to do it in a way that recognizes the systemic inequities that have existed in our country and in our communities. And so it is the work that needs to be done, the infrastructure work, the critical work that needs to be done, but it's also thoughtful about how we approach it. And so at Exelon, we're looking at making proposals that will seek to drive transformative outcomes that supports both the administration's priorities and also accelerate Exelon's clean energy goals that drive the company's priorities. This, we see, provides an opportunity to understand our stakeholders and to partner with them to address state, regional, and local priorities related to infrastructure needs. Some of the priorities, as have been mentioned, closing the broadband digital divide, as the language in the Act calls disadvantaged communities, and how the electric vehicle zones will impact them, end-to-end mobility solutions that will impact public transportation, electric vehicle, and last mile solutions, et cetera. So those are some of the important things that we're thinking about. From an equity lens, we can also address it, as I mentioned, from a workforce development standpoint. In other words, how might we address the economic inequities, unemployment, underemployment, and how these things are both disproportionately impact underserved, under-resourced communities around our country. Looking at where in a state you might have, for example, one unemployment rate, and then looking at the various zip codes and looking where it's disproportionately different or greater than that. And how might we, as we roll out this work and the jobs and so forth, be looking and focusing on those. And so as a T&D or transmission and distribution company, Exelon is keenly focused on infrastructure, always investing in our grid, wanting to ensure we've got strong and excellent reliability. This doesn't just impact the community, but it also relates to how we exist as a company and our priority and commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. What we're describing, or what I've described external to the company, also is how we live, and the virtues and the values that we live by internal to the company, ensuring that we're looking at representation and seeking to reflect the communities and customers we serve. And so the emphasis on infrastructure is key. It's a good time for it. It's a transformational opportunity to do it, but it's also, has been pointed out, critical to do it in a way that serves and uplifts those communities in need.
Thanks, Robert. And Arlen, turning to you, it sounds like you have been, there from the inception of the DC Infrastructure Academy, when it was just, a gleam in your eye almost 4 years ago in 2018, and right there in the name, infrastructure is front and center. And so I'm curious, why was that the focus for the city's job training program? And can you describe just how the Academy works for district residents that want to think about career paths in the energy sector? Actually, I think you're on mute, Carolyn.
Sorry about that. Just wanted to say thank you very much, first and foremost, to the Bipartisan Policy Center for allowing me to be a part of this panel. Thank you to you, Leslie, and I'm honored to be here with Ralph and Robert as well, two titans in the industry. But for the DC Infrastructure Academy, Mayor Bowser and the Bowser administration have been dedicated to providing opportunities for district residents for pathways to the middle class. And with some research from the Department of Employment Services and understanding trends in hiring needs and in career paths within the region, it was very clear that the energy sector and infrastructure sector were opportunities for growth for district residents and to create new opportunities. And so that's really where the thought process behind creating the DC Infrastructure Academy came about. Our former city administrator, Rashad Young, as well as the Mayor Bowser administration, came up with the idea and really put it forth. It was originally proposed during the Mayor's State of the City address in 2017 with a 2-year plan to create the academy. And then Mayor Bowser realized and quickly came back to us about a month later and said, I actually want to make sure that we are open by my next State of the District address. So within 1 year, we went from an idea and putting it into the mayor's budget to actually opening our doors in March of 2018. And so the DC Infrastructure Academy, since its inception and being in Ward 8 in the district, has been a staple of the community, and we have provided opportunities for over 2,000 district residents to train in the utilities and infrastructure industry. And really how it works is that the DC Infrastructure Academy is free to all district residents over the age of 18. There are some minimum requirements as far as testing, and we also provide remediation classes for those who don't meet the minimum requirements for testing. We provide a stipend for participants that, as of now, is $10 an hour, but should be going up to $16.10 an hour, which is the district minimum wage. And so we provide this free training with a stipend while you're going through the training. And then the key part of what makes the DC Infrastructure Academy so successful is our partnerships. Our partnerships with companies like Pepco, which is a part of the Exelon family, being a part of being part of the DC Infrastructure Academy since its inception. We also have partnerships with Washington Gas, with our local metro system, and the national partners, including Ford and Cisco systems. And so one of the things that really makes this a unique training program is that all of those partners are intricately involved in the actual trainings, and then they work with us to place those graduates into career opportunities. And we like to say careers rather than jobs, because these are really family sustaining and life-changing opportunities for our participants. And so, the DC Infrastructure Academy, we are always looking at opportunities to expand and grow and always wanting to bring on new partners. And the district has invested in us tremendously, tripling our budget using ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan Act funds, as well as putting into the budget for us to expand into a new state-of-the-art facility with a $52 million investment over 4 years. And so it is really a testament to the Bowser administration and the Department of Employment Services for all the work that's been put into this program. And lastly, I would just say, we really consider the DC Infrastructure Academy to be the epitome of what a public-private partnership is supposed to be, where you've got the public sector that is willing to put up the manpower and the support behind a program, and you've got the private sector that is willing to stand there right with us and to provide opportunities for our participants.
Absolutely. That is such a fantastic example. And, I really would like to build off that. Robert, I'll go back to you because of that public-private partnership, the idea that we're teaming up, to meet this identified community need for more family wage jobs, a trained workforce. But, these types of changes, they're not going to happen overnight. So can you reflect on some of the challenges and the necessities of making long-term investments in communities and workers? And for Exelon as a corporation, how are you ensuring that a workforce development program that you're sponsoring today isn't just a one-off initiative that's here today, gone tomorrow?
I think the biggest challenge is how companies see and frame the issue. If companies see it as this is something that's being done strictly in response to a national issue or national crisis, or something that is the flavor of the day, these things won't be sustainable. They won't be enduring. They won't be lasting. For it to be enduring, for it to, I believe, as Ralph said so clearly in his opening, for this to address the years of inequity, for it to have a difference, it has to be tied to a company's purpose. If a company sees its role in part to also be a transformative component of community, then it will see its purpose of doing business and also being a powerful impact in community. So seeing it inextricable from their purpose is how to ensure it's an enduring thing. If it's connected to purpose, then it determines where companies will make investments, and not just make investments when it's convenient, but also to understand that those investments are critical even when times are tough, even when there are challenges. And then from those investments, you look at how can we measure it? How are we driving impact? Are we creating those opportunities and really changing the lives in community? When I think about Exelon and how we have approached it, it's right there in our purpose statement to create, to power a cleaner and brighter future for customer and community. That's who we are. And so community is a part of it. It's right in our purpose. And so when we think about the investments like the DC infrastructure and the other programs that exist around our footprint around the country, we are investing $14 million in workforce development programs. And these programs are targeted to specifically address economic inequities in communities, ensuring that we are creating and preparing youth and work-ready adults for family supporting careers. And so we see it as a part of who we are, inextricable from our identity, and therefore driving that impact. It's also important to point out that, and I know we've talked about partnerships, points well made there, but it has to be done collaboratively. We are good at what we do, but we're not good at all things that need to be done. And so we look for partners in government and partners in nonprofit and partners in education. And as we approach that, we determine the types of investments we'll make, what makes sense, what's the most impactful. It has to be done collaboratively.
Thank you, Robert. And that what I'm hearing is that we're really talking about building a pathway, a long-term commitment, a pipeline, all the way from the education and jobs training piece of it to the actual careers for individual workers. And I know, Ralph, you and Abe have been thinking about opportunities to build pipelines for entrepreneurs, especially, for the women, minority, and veteran-owned businesses through supplier diversity initiatives. And so I'd love to hear a little more about why it's important to think about procurement and supply chain contractors when we're talking about an energy workforce.
Absolutely. When you look at wealth creation in any community, it's so often driven by entrepreneurs who bring innovation, who bring an awareness of needs that others might not recognize. Entrepreneurs, are without a doubt a critical resource in any community in terms of driving economic growth and innovation. And so, how the industry broadly creates inclusive opportunity for those of diverse backgrounds in their supply chains is a really critical issue. And so many and so often supply chains can be closed and rigid and have very stringent, one size fits all kind of approaches. And we know that for small businesses, typically women and minority businesses make up only about 10% of the sales, B2B sales in that space, just broadly in the economy. And the other thing that I would say in the economy, when you look at this particular issue, about 3% of the 350,000 B2B firms do well over 80% of the business. And so you've got a tremendous amount of concentration in that space as well. And so what we want to do is help foster, help companies understand how to create more open supply chains and therefore increase the resiliency within their own supply chain, increase the innovation within their own supply chain, because again, bringing that diverse set of perspectives when you're serving customers that are diverse, or even when you're going out into the marketplace, those suppliers that help with workforce development, that help with placement of staff, that they will understand more about how to reach talent in those communities as well. And so I think so often having a one size fits all with respect to how you manage strategic relationships in that supply chain area can really hinder the ability to bring in those of diverse backgrounds, diverse entrepreneurs who can bring something special to your supply chain. And so having said that, what we really try to do is create a lot of transparency with respect to where the opportunities are going to be. So not only do you have to have the entrepreneurs have to recognize where the opportunities are going to be. And as Wayne Gretzky would say, they got to skate to where the puck's going to be, not where it is today. So you have to help them to understand that. And then the third component of that is, in order to create that growth, you have to have patient capital. So often in our community, number one, we're a bit hesitant to bring in additional equity owners because we don't necessarily have training, if you will, on the sophistication of some of the way some of these things can be structured so that you still retain control of your company, but you bring in the patient capital that you need. It is so difficult to fund growth as well as pay and cover the expenses of an ongoing concern. And so these are some of the traps that we run into in our community that causes us to really, number one, not see and understand where the opportunities are. Number two, not be able to take advantage of the opportunities because we don't have that patient capital and a way to structure our businesses in a little bit more sophisticated way. So we want to create more knowledge around those areas. We certainly also encourage those who have long experience in the industry to consider, stepping out and becoming entrepreneurs when they see the opportunity. certainly I'm one that would tell you that it is not an easy transition, but we certainly want to do what we can to encourage those who have the foresight, the talent to be entrepreneurs. We want to encourage those who are capital providers. We want to encourage those on the, let's call it the Fortune 500 side of this equation, to really think about what their policies and practices are as well relative to supply chain. I've run 2 supply chains in Fortune 500 companies, and I can tell you that you really do have to be thoughtful about how you structure some of the requirements to get in and provide services to these companies. So often preferences and biases can masquerade as requirements. And so we really want to help firms to understand, where, some of these things, a one size fits all is really creating just exclusionary policies and practices and don't allow for greater inclusion of our community with respect to these opportunities. So that's kind of our take on it and what we want to do to help, create more knowledge and understanding of the issues on all sides of the equation.
That's fantastic, Ralph. I think you're making such a great point about the need to be intentional and conscious, in these kinds of decision makings. And I think, that, Arlen, when we look at the DC Infrastructure Academy, and, we're seeing amazing success that you're having with the high rates of program completion, job placements, really, excellent statistics. And we're looking at how your graduates can go to find jobs, not only in utilities themselves, but also in the network of energy suppliers, as Ralph was describing, and creating those relationships and expansions. I'd love to hear from you, how does that factor into your long-term outlook for the Infrastructure Academy, and is this new focus on infrastructure going to help build and expand those relationships with different types of companies?
Yeah, absolutely. The DC Infrastructure Academy, we're always looking to expand and to create new opportunities and to work with different companies in different sectors within the utility industry to provide opportunities for our participants. One of the great things about us is that we have what we call our advisory committees, which are based around different parts of the infrastructure world. And each one of those committees, we have advisory panel members who kind of work with us. They talk about industry trends, they talk about new opportunities for growth and expansion, and they advise us on the types of trainings that we should be providing for our participants to make sure that we are staying at the forefront of what's needed within the industry. And that has been extremely helpful because we have tailored some of our trainings since the start of our program. One of the programs that is most successful is our PEPCO program, where we train for overhead and underground line workers. When we first had that program, we started that program, there were a couple of elements that were not internal, and we learned that there were some things that we had to add. So an example is that we found that some of the graduates in the first couple of cohorts realized that there may be have a fear of heights later on, and not having an element where during the program that they were training on actual electrical poles and the climbing portion and getting used to that and having that a part of the program. And it is a testament to our partnership with PEPCO that they donated an entire pole yard to the DC Infrastructure Academy and maintain that pole yard. And so every class that comes through now has that training. And we've definitely seen an improvement in those folks who've come through that training program and their job prospects as a part of that. We also, you all were talking a little bit ago about diversity and providing opportunities, particularly around women in the industry. We know from the opening of DC Infrastructure Academy that there's been a gap in the number of women who applied to be a part of our program and the number of men who have applied to be a part of our program. And we've gone above and beyond to try to close that gap. But there's obviously always more that can be done. But we've done things like working to go out into the community. A lot of times people hear about these programs just by word of mouth, but we have definitely worked with other programs within the Department of Employment Services, like our Workforce on Wheels, where we go into communities at community events and just sometimes random parking lots where there are congregations of community, and work with participants to try to get them involved in our programs. We've also worked with our Mayor's Office of Women's Policy and Initiatives to expand our program reach. And even last year during Infrastructure Week, we hosted a Women in Infrastructure panel as a part of DCIA's Infrastructure Week, where we had over 100 participants from across the country who joined in and listened to our program, about our program and ways that women can be more involved in the industry. One of the things that I'm the most proud of for DCIA is that one of the first overhead line workers to work for PEPCO is actually women line workers to work for PEPCO is actually a DCIA graduate. And so we are constantly bringing in and recruiting more and more women. And I would say that from the start of our program to today, probably about a fifth of the participants in our programs now are women, each cohort that comes through. And that's a marked improvement. Still not where we would like it to be, obviously, but we are working from where we had no women participating in our programs in some cohorts to now we are definitely seeing an improvement. And it's because of word of mouth and taking every opportunity that we have to highlight that. And so, we're always looking to expand opportunities, always looking to make sure that the DC Infrastructure Academy is not seen as something that is unattainable or unreachable for participants and district residents. The DC Infrastructure Academy is based in Ward 8, one of the historically underserved communities of the district, for a reason, because we want to make sure that every district resident understands the commitment that the Bowser administration and the Department of Employment Services has to providing opportunities in all 8 wards.
Thanks, Arlen. And that's really, I love the description that you had of, something's not working, we're seeing a gap, and we're just trying different things, trying to, be innovative in a government program to help do those things. And, one of the things I mentioned at the top of this program was what actions the federal government and this administration is taking towards their broader equity agenda. And we saw that actually last week, the different federal agencies, I think about 25 of them, have published equity action plans as part of their implementation of the executive order around advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities. And I see this as part of this commitment, trying to say we're taking a whole of government approach to advance these issues of environmental and economic justice and equity. But Ralph, I'd be curious to hear from you, like what do you think in terms of how do we think about commitments versus actions, and what do we think are as what would be the top of your wish list, I guess, in terms of what you would want to see from federal action and communities' outcomes as part of this Justice in 40 investments?
I think that's a terrific question. So often the well-intentioned laws don't necessarily lead to a change in policies and practices where the decisions are made. And so even when we see laws passed and laws on the books, what enforcement mechanisms are there? What incentives are there for others to more fully participate, even volunteer to participate? And so often what I see is, if companies and more broadly decision makers don't view that it's in their interest to really support the policy or the law or the policy, there will be an effort to mitigate what they think or might be some adverse impacts associated with it, versus fully understanding the issues and embracing the spirit of the law. It is one thing to make sure you're in compliance with the law. It is another thing altogether to embrace the spirit of the law, and to understand that the reason the law exists is to solve some inequity or some issue. And so how you think about it, how leaders think about that, and how decision makers make decisions about that, it absolutely needs to be addressed as it relates to the way the laws translate into regulation, the way the regulation translates into policy, and the way the policy translates into practices and decisions. And so often there's a breakdown from the law down to the practices and the actual decisions that get made. And so change is very slow to occur. What people have to realize, I think, is that these systems are perfectly designed to create the outcomes that we see. And so if we see inequitable outcomes on a consistent and ongoing basis, it means that the system is perfectly designed to produce that. And we're not talking about small systems here. We are talking about diffuse decision-making across multiple organizations, multiple institutions, multiple firms, and participants. And so if you're going to change that, you have to put the right incentive structures in place. You have to put the right enforcement mechanisms in place. And so that's where my biggest concerns are relative to this. I can't tell you how many times I've seen well-intentioned laws get passed and people find a way to mitigate it or skirt and just show that they're in compliance when the results never get changed. And so we've got to do more, I think, to really address and have honest conversations about what's creating these outcomes. And I'm just a firm believer that, you know, with systems these large and this, you know, diffuse in the decision making, you know, you have to really create a cadre, a cohort of leaders who fully understand it and really go about addressing where there is injustice, where there is inequity, address those things in the moment with the right incentives and the right structures and programs as an intervention. But ultimately, it's about how do you create a more just society? And how do you remove the barriers that exist in the first place? Because we know when we do that, you actually are building greater amounts of trust in society. You can't have trust in society when the distributional outcomes are so skewed. And when people peel back and look at the way the decision making is done, there's little to no procedural justice as well. You have to have both procedural justice as well as distributional justice. And where it's difficult for you to create distributional justice, usually it's because people are coming to that system having to go up against inequities and disparities that have existed for a long time. And so you have to be willing to address all of those things. And so thank you for the question, because it's something, as you can tell, I'm fairly passionate about. That translation from law to you know, regulations, to policies, and then practices and decisions. That's where this whole thing starts to break down.
Thanks so much, Ralph. And you know, we are moving now into the audience Q&A portion, but I do want to ask before we do that, if Arlen and then Robert can sort of build off that, I would love to hear, you know, what does a successful commitment to equity and inclusion look like for you at the local level? What are you hoping to see out of these new investments? And for our audience members, please enter your questions into the chat feature in YouTube or use the hashtag BPC Live, and we will get to that right after this. Arlen, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. You know, equity and inclusion to us is, you know, just making sure that that opportunities are provided evenly, and that every person who wants an opportunity is given an opportunity to succeed. For us, you know, that is the commitment of this administration to making sure that every Washingtonian has a pathway to the middle class, and that when resources and and things are provided to the district, that is distributed evenly across all 8 wards, and that each individual has an opportunity to take advantage and to utilize those services. That's why the DC Infrastructure Academy is absolutely free to all district residents. That's why we provide a stipend to our participants, because we know that those who may have a greater economic starting place are going to be better to succeed going through a training program. And we realized that early on, that if someone has to choose between feeding their family and going through a training, they're going to find a way to feed their family as fast as possible. And so that's why we provide opportunities like that. We do things, even opportunities for travel stipends back and forth to get from home to the training opportunities. So for us, just to make it simple, it really is about understanding all the mechanisms that government has in place and how those mechanisms can be used to provide opportunities for everyone, and equal opportunities across the board.
When I think about Exelon, where diversity, equity, and inclusion is both a business imperative, in other words, it helps us be a better business, and a core value. It's what we believe in. We strive to function with an equity lens. I heard one person say it this way, that when companies and institutions perceive things as unfortunate, they will respond with charity. When they see it as unjust, that's when they will understand the requirement is to respond with equity. And so we have to understand the context in which we exist. And I think Ralph said it well, that the outcomes that we are seeing result because they were designed to do so. And so we have to, with the same intention and deliberate approach, understand the systems that have been created, and with intention and focus, seek to, number one, get to equity by looking at how do we create those opportunities, but also what are the ways that we can look at the barriers and try to dismantle and unpack those barriers so that opportunities can exist for those who have been marginalized and historically excluded. And so equity is key, it's critical, it's essential to how we move forward.
Can I just add, that there's a reason that it's called equity and inclusion and not equality and inclusion, and that is because you can't use the same process and the same brush to paint every group and to kind of put everyone in the same opportunity. You have to really tailor it. And that was what, even going back to the question about women in infrastructure and the ways that we've definitely tried to target that population and things like that. So understanding that there's not one solution that's going to fix and provide opportunities for everyone is really what's important.
Thanks, Arlen. And while I have you here, actually, we have a question from our audience from CC King, who asks, who is eligible to participate in the Academy? And is Academy participation now happening virtually, hybrid, in person? How has, I guess, the pandemic affected your work?
Sure. Well, first, as long as you are a district resident over the age of 18, you are eligible to come into the DC Infrastructure Academy and register to participate in one of our programs. There is a test that is required. It's just a placement test. It's called the CASAS test, and it scores you on a grade level in math and reading. There are minimum requirements for the different programs that we have, but if someone is interested in a program and they don't meet one of those requirements, we also provide what we call our level up courses to get someone to that benchmark to join one of our programs. But that is the baseline minimum, is that you must be over the age of 18 and a district resident. And we are doing all of our trainings are in person now. During the pandemic, we did switch to a hybrid model, but we have switched back to in-person learning.
Great, thanks so much. And we also have a question here from Jeffrey Davis about tracking the penetration of minority workers in the clean energy workforce. Are we thinking, or Robert, I don't know if you or Ralph have thoughts on how do we develop better tracking, monitoring, and reporting mechanisms to ensure that we're making progress towards these goals?
I guess I'll start. This gets back to the point that I raised about enforcement. I do think the first step to really managing to an outcome is measurement. And certainly everyone in management has heard the mantra, you can't manage what you don't measure. And so this is job one, is to create that transparency. And so how do you begin to require, identify and then require reporting on the metrics that matter, on the metrics that mean that we actually seeing a movement in the needle. I think a lot of times metrics that I see are activities based. And I would much rather see activities that are measurements that are results based. And so, how do we go about thinking that through and providing the right structure and framework for what that reporting should look like?
Yeah, I think it's also important to, and Ralph makes the point well, to look at from a workforce development standpoint in particular, how are we measuring those outcomes? Arlen talked about our success in the DC infrastructure program, and we have other programs in our other jurisdictions similar to it. But we're looking at how many participants, how many graduates, what's the rate of pay at the point of graduation, what's the success rate through the programs and why? To what extent are the wraparound services or support services delivering on what they intend? What's the rate of pay at a second year? How long are they are they still in the industry and in those roles or similar roles after a few years? Are they moving from those entry-level roles and so forth? And so it's accountability. When I think about how we function as a company, we're looking at our business results in the same conversations and discussions that we're looking at our community and diversity, equity, inclusion results. And so they are not two different conversations. They're one that's based on what are we setting out to do? How will we measure it? To what are the accountability mechanisms and what are those outcomes and results? And then from there, developing a plan to continue to do what we've done well, or to start over or to restart where we see some opportunities to do differently or to drive greater impact.
So important. Thanks, Robert. We have another question from Caroline Love, who asks, how do you support formerly incarcerated folks, so also referred to as returning citizens, in workforce development programs and follow that through with jobs? And Arlen, I know you've thought a little bit about this, so.
Yes, we actually work with our Office of Returning Citizens within the DC government. We work with returning citizens all the time. We have worked with those through all parts of our program. We do not turn any person away based off of a criminal background, but we do work with them about being realistic about what their opportunities are once they go through our program, and we try to put them into a program that we know they'll be ultimately successful after they complete the program and getting an opportunity. But again, one of the great things about this program is that when the companies are a part of the program, from the recruitment through the training and the back end, they are able to work with individuals. And there are companies that have worked with us that have hired people who've had backgrounds that they historically would not necessarily have hired, because they've been able to work with those individuals through the stages of the program and understand where they are now and not where they originally come from. So every participant is welcome to participate.
Somebody calling time on us?
Yeah, exactly. They know we're coming to the top of the hour. And so just very quickly, we in the last 2 minutes that we have here, CC King also would like to know, how are we thinking about the new cadre of leaders, and how do we correct for the existing diversity imbalances, and just thinking about, like, from the top, how do we model better forms of achievement for more diversity within the workforce? And Ralph, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's such a great question, because we do believe at ABE that in order to really create a more inclusive environment and to foster high performance, you really need leaders who understand how to manage diversity, how to manage and leverage diversity. Within any diverse mixture, the similarities and differences lead to tension and complexity. And you have to have people who have the skill to manage that. And when they don't, that's when we see polarization. So it's really an important thing, this idea of how do you get skilled at managing and leveraging diversity, not just tolerate it. And so that's our approach. That's one of the training programs that we have at AID that we're looking to continue to grow and expand our impact with that program.
Fantastic. Robert, any final thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Ralph. Excellent point there. It's critical, again, as I mentioned, for companies and organizations to understand their views on this, their sense of value around this, and then ensure that it has the leaders who will drive it forward. And so it's an introspective look at how do I find myself? Is my are my head, heart, and hands involved in this work? And I think organizations have to think about how they select leaders so that they can have the leaders in place to drive their organizations forward. I'm glad to be a part of this conversation and to be a part of a company who values it and seeks to drive forward with it.
I'm glad that we were joined today by such fantastic and insightful conversations. Thank you again, Ralph Cleveland, Robert Matthews, and Arlen Harrell. It's been a pleasure. And I hope that for our audience members, you tune in for more discussions from the BPC. We will be hosting additional infrastructure related events, and keep an eye out on our website for those. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.